Good evening, everyone. We're just going to give people a few minutes to come in before we start. All right. And terrific. Just because we have a lot to cover today, and I would like to start on time, we're going to get started. My name is James Nerona. I'm the Program Director for Special Olympics Ontario. And I'd like to welcome you all to a very special session that we're running on sport and belonging. Just before we begin, just be aware that if you have any questions, there's a lot of really interesting things that you're going to be hearing. If you have any questions, you should be able to ask questions in the question and answer box, and Roxy or myself will be able to see that and feedback some of those answers. There will be a question and answer period at the end of the presentation where we'll allow people to unmute their microphones and ask the questions out loud, or you'll be able to chat. I'm hearing here that there is a very bad echo. I think I know what's wrong, so just give me 1 second here. What? Should do. Try that. Okay. Hopefully that's a little bit better. Okay, so great. So let's get started. So one last thing to let you know is that this presentation is being recorded. And because it's being recorded, it is going live at the same time. So just be aware of that as we're going. You won't be appearing on screen, so that's nothing to worry about. So welcome to the Sport and Belonging Project, which is a partnership of the University of Toronto and Special Olympics Ontario. Before we begin, we would like to start by acknowledging this land. We begin by acknowledging that though we are meeting virtually, we are all on land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. In particular, we acknowledge that the Special Olympics Ontario office is located on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The land is governed by the Dish with One Spoon covenant between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of Ojibwe and allied nations. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work, live, and play on this land. And with that, I'd like to turn this presentation over to Roxy O'Rourke.
Thanks for that introduction. So as James mentioned, we're the Sport and Belonging Project, which is a partnership of the University of Toronto and Special Olympics Ontario. And we have a number of individuals from our research team here presenting on behalf of the entire Sport and Belonging research team. So as I mentioned, this is a collaborative research project. And so we have research team members from the University of Toronto, as well as Special Olympics team members, including athletes, as well as the program director, James. And then we also have a number of research assistants who play a key role on a number of project elements. We'd first like to just acknowledge that we're grateful for the study participants that have shared their experiences with us, as well as the Connaught Fund, which funded this research. So a brief outline of what we'll be presenting today. So we'll talk about what the project is about and why we did the research that we did. We'll talk about why it is important. We'll talk about what belonging is. We'll talk about how the project was done, including the partnership and collaboration of our research team. We'll talk about some preliminary findings, so what we've learned so far, and then also what the implications of these findings are. So why are they valuable and how you can use them as coaches, families, and volunteers. And then we'll also have a question and discussion period.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I'm going to be talking about what this project is about and why we did this research and are still doing it. Just as a bit of background, I wanted to talk about some of the limitations that there have been with inclusion approaches to policy and programs for people with disabilities. To sum it up, too often, using an inclusion approach has resulted in people with disabilities being present in the community, but not really engaged in their communities and in society. And there's some evidence from some more recent research that indicates that understanding belonging and using belonging as a way to look at inclusion may be a helpful approach. Previous research also tells us that belonging can happen through participating in organized sport, including through Special Olympics. But what we don't know very much about yet is how does belonging happen in organized sport? And so this project aimed to learn about how belonging happens, and sometimes not, for young adults participating in Special Olympics organized sport.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the genesis of this project because obviously the subjects of inclusion, belonging, integration, and equity and participation are near and dear to the Special Olympics movement and to our hearts, right? But I think sometimes what we recognized as we've been exploring programs like Unified Sport, and for many of you who were part of the Unified Sport presentation earlier in the conference, I said at the time that these were bookends, right? Bookend presentations. And if you haven't seen that presentation, I would highly encourage you to go back and take a look at it because my colleague Kelly from the University of Toronto, who's going to be speaking on this slide as well, led research as it related to the experiences of athletes with and without intellectual disabilities on how they felt about being on unified teams. And that conversation was an interesting one because over the last 7 or 8 years, as we've introduced more and more unified opportunities, right, we've recognized that there is a difference between quality unified opportunities and simply integration, and simple integration. And the differences seem to be related to what happens when you throw a whole bunch of people into a room together, right? Integration, versus what happens when people feel included through meaningful activity and meaningful participation, right? But we throw these words around, and when we have to start explaining it, right, we find ourselves explaining it in a very anecdotal way. We tell stories that relate to what we've heard, but not necessarily in a constructed and methodical and research-oriented way. And so this research was born out of collaboration, right? It started as part of a unified conversation that we were having with the Faculty of Kinesiology at the University of Toronto, right? And it expanded to include Rebecca, who you've just met, in the Faculty of Occupational Therapy, who were looking at feelings of belonging, not necessarily exclusively related to sport. And we realized that we could marry these things together into a very concrete and very real exploration of how our athletes felt, right, about the programs that they were in and the feelings of belonging that created. But the first piece that we needed to know was, what does belonging even mean? And that sounds a little counterintuitive, but the actual definition of belonging became one of the first things that we actually had to deal with. Why is that important? It's important because it governs everything about how we make decisions as a movement and as an organization about where we are headed and what our next programs look like. And if we are going to create new programs, we need to do it in an informed way. And that means really understanding what it is our athletes are experiencing. And that's what this project was about. Kelly?
Thank you, James. And it's a nice segue into this next slide, that the idea of what is belonging. And as Rebecca mentioned earlier, it goes beyond just being present on a team. In case of sport, belonging is a feeling that you may have of some or all of the words on this screen. So you may feel that you're comfortable within a group or a space, feeling important, safe, accepted, included. like you fit in and part of something. And as James had mentioned, the beginning of a partnership that I have had with Special Olympics was focusing on unified sport and recognizing the importance of belonging, how it contributes to an overall quality experience in sport. But unified sport is one of type of sports that special athletes can feel a sense of belonging, but there are other types of sports. So I think that's something that's of tremendous value. The work that we'll be sharing with you today is looking at the different types of programs that Special Olympics offers and how the athletes feel a sense of belonging or not in those experiences. So in terms of how this project was done, and our team takes tremendous value in that it is a very much inclusive research project. So some of you may be familiar with other types of research that's maybe gone on with Special Olympics and maybe just in other experiences, where maybe you filled out a survey or maybe you've been part of an interview, which has contributed tremendously to research. But this project is very different in that it's inclusive, where we bring athletes, with Special Olympic athletes, staff such as James, myself and Rebecca, who are both researchers at the University of Toronto, Roxy, who is a PhD student of mine at University of Toronto, as well as other students in occupational therapy and kinesiology. Our team is diverse, but we all work together and we all have a role on this research team. So as I mentioned, we have athletes with intellectual disability who are part of our research team. We also have participants in our study. So that's maybe where you've had experience in research, where you've taken part in an interview or a survey. And the aim of our research is that it's accessible and it's appropriate for all members of our research team, as well as the participants that we interview, so the different techniques that we use to be able to have conversations with different Special Olympics athletes, and the broader Special Olympics community. So once we find out certain pieces of information, what are the best ways to get that information out most effectively and make it accessible to the Special Olympics community and beyond that. So when we look specifically at the uniqueness of this type of team, the role of our athletes and Special Olympics staff on our research team is very critical of sharing that unique lived experience of an athlete and the knowledge that really contribute to our team, and to be able to do research that is more meaningful and that will be able to help yourselves, being volunteers, and others in this space, to be able to take that knowledge and to apply it to practice.
And I'm just going to just like reinforce that point, right? For a really long time, you know, and I've had the great fortune of watching this evolve. As many of you know, right, you know, we often feel the pressure of like survey exhaustion. You know, you feel like you're always being asked questions, and please know that that information is always and continues to be extremely valuable to the movement as we figure out where to focus our energies and what to apply resources to. But I think there's also, and there has always been, this feeling that Special Olympics athletes, our coaches, our families are kind of like research subjects, right? As opposed to the folks that guide research, right? And I want to emphasize that has been probably one of the highlights of my my involvement at Special Olympics are these relationships that have been developed, because the truth is that true collaborative research, the type that is being done here, you know, with Kelly's team and Rebecca's team, are very unique, and I really do mean that. There is no research that is being done in this manner anywhere within the movement at the moment, and that's really critical, right? Because the act of including like Special Olympics as an organization, but also our athletes as investigators, as valued and integral parties in the establishment of the questions, and more importantly, as valued and important members who are helping interpret the information, is critical. And I don't have to look really that far beyond an early meeting where a member of our team really reshaped how I think of belonging, right? You know, by saying, you know, I've been on teams that where I have which have included members of all abilities, where I haven't felt like I belong, right? You know, I feel like I'm there, but I've been on unified teams where I feel like I'm an integral and important part of the team. And that's the difference, right? That's what it means to belong. And so I think that is a critical part of this. And so to talk about, to validate that and to talk about how this research is done, I'd like to introduce you to a Special Olympics athlete and a member of the project team, Caleb.
All right, so thank you, James. As you said, participating in regular team meetings were 3 young adult Special Olympics Ontario athletes, including myself. Because we have lived experience as Special Olympics athletes, we were able to consult on several aspects of the project from a unique personal standpoint. We helped our teammates on group decisions, like writing interview questions, analyzing the project, and evaluating our findings. So how did all this feel from an athlete's perspective? Honestly, I loved that myself, my fellow athletes were not just brought on for representation's sake, but our experience as SOO athletes were truly valued. We had just as much a role to play in making decisions, including for this very presentation, as everyone else. It was also an educational experience, especially for myself as someone who was at the time entering their first year of university. So because our project would be interviewing a sample group of Special Olympics athletes to draw conclusions on the general experience of people with intellectual disabilities in SOO, it was essential our team had members from this very demographic, my demographic. As athlete consultants and representatives of Special Olympics, we didn't just consider our own lives, but also the perspectives of many athletes and caregivers we know personally, such as teammates and people we've met at different Special Olympics events. So in particular, we had a key role in designing interview questions. This helped the team make sure our interview questions would be as comprehensive and accessible for as many people as possible. After we had our questions written, the U of T students held practice interviews with myself, Ben, and Victoria before interviewing our participants. So why 3 of us? Honestly, what I was mentioned earlier is the reason why it was important that 3 people were brought as Special Olympics athlete representatives as opposed to only 1 person. There were a lot of times where Ben or Victoria or I brought a perspective that the rest of us just hadn't thought of. Speaking personally, the research team also became a bit of a social group, a way to network and form relationships. Everyone enjoyed each other's company as we spent time together on the project, and I really hope this is the case for other inclusive research projects in the future.
Okay, this is Rebecca again, and I'm going to talk about what we've learned so far on this project. We interviewed 20 Special Olympics Ontario athletes with intellectual disabilities who were between the ages of 18 and 35. Half of them were young men and half of them were young women. They played quite a number of sports. In fact, the number of sports played by these athletes ranged from 2 to 7 sports, with an average of 4 sports for each athlete. Also, one noteworthy thing was that a lot of our athletes had spent quite a bit of time being involved in Special Olympics. So just to expand on this pie chart a little bit and to sum it up, the length of time of involvement in Special Olympics by the athletes we interviewed ranged from 1 year to more than 20 years. And about 75% of those who took part had in fact been involved in Special Olympics for 7 years or more. So these individuals represent a few sections on this pie chart. The types of sport that the people we interviewed engaged in are shown here. So team sports shown in the blue. There were 7 athletes out of the 20 that played team sports. Then in the dark orange, this represents 3 individuals who played individual sports, and fully half, or 10 of our 20 athletes that we interviewed, represented by this lightish brown portion of the pie chart, played both team and individual sports. When we interviewed athletes, we asked them to tell us the story of their Special Olympics journey, with particular emphasis on their experiences of belonging and or not belonging, because some people did have experiences of both. We had planned originally to meet in person so that we could have truly personalized interviews with each individual athlete of the 20 people that we interviewed. However, the pandemic, COVID, intervened, and so we had to go online, and our interviews were done with Zoom. So we had to make some special efforts to make sure that what we were asking was accessible to all of the people we interviewed. And just next slide, please. One of the ways we tried to make the interview was accessible was to show them this illustration to guide our conversation during the interview. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, we asked each athlete to tell their story about their Special Olympics journey, with special emphasis on experiences of belonging or not belonging in their engagement in Special Olympics. So we showed them this illustration to guide our interview conversation. And so the illustration shows 4 points in each athlete's journey through Special Olympics. We started with 1, joining Special Olympics, then moved to their engagement in sports before a Special Olympics. So we asked them to take kind of a flashback or a trip down memory lane. And then we went into number 3 on the graphic to talk about their experiences in Special Olympics right now. And finally, we moved on to ask them about their future in Special Olympics and sports and beyond into community life. And so this little map of a journey through Special Olympics really helped the conversation move along, and athletes then could orient themselves to where exactly we were in our conversation about their journey through Special Olympics and belonging. So what we asked the participating athletes about was to tell us how belonging happens for you through Special Olympics. And we unpacked that word belonging. We offered some alternative terms for belonging that Kelly talked about earlier, like feelings of acceptance and fitting in and being part of something, in order to promote understanding and accessibility for the athletes that we interviewed. So before we show this little clip, I just want to get a video clip. I want to give a background to this. One of the things we did with our early findings is to create a video about our early findings, and the whole team worked together in doing this. So this is one of our inclusive collaborative activities that our team took part in. And what we did was, this video was created using Bitmoji characters to talk about, those characters talk about a summary of some of our overall important findings that are coming out of this study so far. So the 3 athletes, Bitmoji characters that you will meet in the video are Arjun, Beatrice, and Finn. None of these are real names of any of the athletes that took part. The real athletes that took part are not meant to be represented by how the characters look, but these characters are telling a story about what the athletes told us, and they're summarizing some important points. So with that background in mind, I'll ask Roxy to show us a little clip of the video.
Arjun listens to each of his friends' stories and agrees. Yeah, it was like that for me too. That's why I like Special Olympics, Finn adds. It's all about belonging, no judgment. If someone judges you, the coaches make sure it doesn't happen again, that no one gets left out. Like, nothing mean or bad is allowed. Not all teams and coaches at Special Olympics have been like that, but most of them try to be inclusive. Beatrice smiles. I know. I love the way we encourage each other on and off the field. I always know the first high five I'm going to get is from my teammates, even today at practice. As a joke, Arjun holds up his hand for another high five. Finn laughs. Beatrice and Arjun high five. Arjun adds, and when we cheer together at tournaments, the other Special Olympics teams cheer too.
So as you can see, what this video clip kind of sums up are some of the feelings that athletes expressed about belonging and what makes them feel like they belong. And again, these are just examples and illustrations and a summary of what athletes told us. So if you'll remember back to the picture that I was talking about a few minutes ago, where we asked each athlete we interviewed about their Special Olympics journey, there were 4 points or 4 phases in that journey. And we're going to focus in talking about our findings so far on athletes' experiences in Special Olympics right now. So this is kind of the 3rd point in their journey. The first point we asked them about was when they joined Special Olympics. Remember, then we flash back to ask them about what their experience with sport and belonging was like before they joined Special Olympics. And the 3rd point in the journey was their experience in Special Olympics right now. And these are some of the summary of it. This is a summary of some of the things we've been finding out about from the athletes that we interviewed about what makes them feel like they belong in Special Olympics right now. And definitely their experiences of sport participation figured largely in why they feel like they belong. They also pointed to their interactions with people who were involved in Special Olympics. So it could be mostly athletes, but also coaches and volunteers. And of course, there's other supporters such as parents of athletes who show up for the games and cheer people on. They talked about too the important roles that they engage in Special Olympics. So they did engage obviously in playing sports, but they also had the opportunity to engage in other roles like leadership and mentorship and volunteer roles. They also talked about how the values of Special Olympics and the way that Special Olympics is organized promotes an atmosphere or climate of mentorship and belonging. As Finn said in the video clip, the character Finn said that there's a sense that you're not being judged, that you're being accepted. So sport participation for the athletes that are currently taking part in Special Olympics usually followed a path from beginning to take part in one sport at first when they joined Special Olympics, and then moving on to involvement in multiple sports. So if you remember the pie chart I showed you a few minutes ago, we saw that at present, fully half of the young athletes that we interviewed play both team and individual sports. And they were involved, I also mentioned that they were involved in an average of 4 different sports each. The other pattern that showed up was that when athletes joined Special Olympics, they tended to go into recreational forms of sport and then moved on to competitive sports. They also started typically playing in traditional sports, and some moved on to playing in unified sports that Kelly was talking about earlier. Most athletes who got involved at the competitive level, and many did, many of the athletes that we interviewed did get involved at the competitive level in Special Olympics, still compete at that level of competition, or they have moved one level higher. So continuing on with our preliminary findings, most athletes that we interviewed participated in other aspects of Special Olympics. So several athletes had mentorship roles, had leadership roles, roles in voluntary activities. Some sat on committees. Some had some opportunities to take part in research. Several athletes also reported that they had parents who were coaches or volunteers for Special Olympics. And all athletes suggested that their parents or family members are key Special Olympics supporters. And they show their support and offer their support by providing transportation to Special Olympics events and competitions and games. And they also show up to watch practices and or tournaments and cheer on their athletes. So the structure of Special Olympics Ontario seems to offer voluntary opportunities to athletes and to their supporters, such as their parents and families, who might not readily be available in other community and sports organizations. So Special Olympics functions based on these opportunities. In other words, Special Olympics really depends on its volunteers, some of you who might be here with us tonight in the audience. So Special Olympics offers new ways for athletes to contribute to a community, to their community, by establishing new goals and new experiences that they may not have found readily available to them elsewhere. And this is a little still from the video we just showed you below here at the bottom of this slide. And it, Arjun is saying, yeah, I feel proud and I like being active and I recognize my talents. And this comes through that feeling that the athletes get from contributing to their community. So Arjun is summing up here what many of the athletes expressed.
I just want to provide a little bit of context because obviously this research started, and was being formulated before March 13th, 2020. And then as this research and interviewing was really getting going, we found ourselves in a completely different environment, a different environment for sport, and a different environment for participation, and certainly a different environment for doing this sort of research. But I do think that these findings are probably not just enhanced, but made even more meaningful as a direct result of the situation we find ourselves in. The impact of COVID-19 on experiences of belonging is profound, right? While it's not part of our primary research question, right? Discussions with athletes brought up those elements that we are all experiencing and seeing, right? Anecdotally, whether it's about feelings of loneliness, disconnection, decreased fitness, both physically and mentally. But it also helps validate, some of the strategies that we were using to expand opportunities for social inclusion in other ways within Special Olympics. That has formed a key component of what we look at when we're developing or creating things like Healthy at Home, or the resources that Jennifer talked about a couple of days ago, or all of those things have been informed by the discussions that are happening with athletes, and we're happening with athletes in real time, and we're being evaluated and we're being looked at as, hey, what can we do and what impact will it have? So we're not chasing or going down rabbit holes when we're talking about what it is that we want to create. And what does that mean? What are the implications of that? Right, moving to the next slide. Right? That the implications of what we've learned so far and the importance to us as a movement, right? None of the things that Rebecca outlined in her slide would be particularly surprising for those of you in the audience who have been living and breathing Special Olympics. But I want to be clear that while we might not find them surprising because internally we're quite validated by the idea that that participation in Special O generates belonging. I guess I want to separate the idea of knowing that because we feel it in our gut versus knowing it because we've actually properly assessed it and evaluated it are fundamentally two different things. And I really want to draw back to that, to the videos and the cartoon that the research team has created, because fundamentally the process of creating that story is one that involved Special Olympics athletes, people who were directly affected and experiencing what it was that was being discussed as they helped interpret what we were being told or what the researchers were being told. And so those stories are actually told. Well, Arjun might not be the name of one of the athletes interviewed. The experiences that he is demonstrating are ones that were reflective of the answers that were coming back and that were coded into the script. And they're told in the words of athletes, right? These stories are real and they reflect a real sample, as opposed to someone like myself standing in front of you saying, I think this is what it means, right? And that is a powerful tool, because those sketches drawn from real and actual responses and evaluated by researchers and athletes create a tool for decision making that we wouldn't readily have, right? Without it, because it'll influence how we develop programs, it'll influence how we educate, and it'll influence how we coach. And those are all important and meaningful things. And probably the most important part of this, and for those of you again who would have seen this in our first presentation, is that it comes back to how we create meaningful and quality experiences. And I'm going to go beyond sport when I say that. How do we create meaningful and powerful and quality experiences in everything that we do? And you don't have to go beyond our existing programming, in sport. You can also talk about what is a meaningful project that we can create to keep people connected during a time of COVID. Is that virtual games? And how does that manifest itself? Is that hometown games? And how does that manifest itself? Is that healthy at home? And how does that manifest itself? Is that our vaccine support line? And how does that manifest itself for the people that we aim to serve? And I'm going to turn it over to Callum, because the truth is that in the voice of our athletes and the voice of the athletes on our research team, I would submit that the goals for the future become wide open with these sorts of this sort of information, because we can look at creating new opportunities for our athletes that we didn't really think about or consider before. And so Callum, I guess I would turn it over to you and ask, or Calum rather, I would turn it over to you and ask, what does this research mean for you? Because that's the most important thing.
Well, for me, what it means is the impact of Special Olympics has been immense. Like, it's a social environment, it's a safe space for vulnerable people to grow, and it's a community full of opportunities for anybody with or without an intellectual disability. While you can hear that from several athletes like myself, Special Olympics employees like James, or volunteers like the people watching this, this project is groundbreaking because it included participants from the community on the research team from the start of the project. This collaboration was important given that the researchers involved didn't have lived experience as individuals with a disability or as athletes in Special Olympics. And building off what James said earlier, our project was truly integrated because of this, rather than just a group of people from different backgrounds put into a room. With a naturally diverse and cohesive team, there isn't a need to force inclusion. Inclusion just happens. Uh, this is a strong suit of traditional Special Olympics, and I believe it's being highlighted for athletes, coaches, and partners and volunteers through collaborative efforts like our Sport and Belonging project. I really hope more projects like this that aren't necessarily just about sport, but include like research or sociology and other things, include more people from all walks of life in this natural, organic, meaningful way.
Great. Well, I would like to just echo the comments both from James and Caleb, just this sense of belonging, I think, and it's linked to what I've been involved in other studies, and I think it's coming out really strong with this project as well, of a quality experience in sport. And we could think of belonging being one of those, a building block to enhance that experience. And I think it was James that mentioned earlier is, maybe what we're finding is resonating with your experience as a volunteer, maybe as an athlete, but there's the research behind it to support that, and what that means in terms of being able to create tools to be able to build more cohesive teams, for example, be able to provide that stronger sense of belonging on a team, a sports team, but also I think in our team here, and Keelan, you spoke about that earlier, and being part of this team and being involved. So we could think of that sense of belonging. Well, we think about in sport and the interviews that we've heard from athletes and their experiences of sport and belonging. We are also experiencing it on this sport and belonging research team. Now, in terms of some takeaway points, I just wanted to highlight some key, what we'd say maybe ingredients to belonging that's coming through the work that we've been doing together. And this being is engaging in social relationships, having meaningful friendships, the value that provides to Special Olympics athletes. And while COVID has presented many challenges in terms of in-person opportunities, I think that Special Olympics has been doing a really great job in terms of trying to virtually connect athletes and to be able to have those social relationships is really being critical to that sense of belonging. The meaningful roles, that's been coming out a lot as well in our research in terms of on sport, whether that be more leadership roles on sports teams, but also the opportunity to be involved in Special Olympics and links with the broader community. So for example, having Caleb and Ben and Victoria, the roles that they play and being a part of this research team and how unique that is because of their first link with Special Olympics. And then focusing on athletes' goals, that has also come out strongly. What is it that athletes want to achieve? What do they find most satisfying, important to them? And having that good fit between maybe the expectations, whether it be in terms of the sport itself, and does that match with the athlete's goals?
So obviously that was a lot of information that we presented to you today. And so we really wanted to emphasize and highlight kind of a key takeaway from both our project as well as the findings that we have so far. And so we really wanted to kind of hammer home that over time and through multiple forms of engagement and mentorship in a context like Special Olympics that offers linked opportunities to experience both sport and belonging, athletes form expanded opportunities for social inclusion in other community contexts outside of sport as well. And so with that, we wanted to open the floor to have a conversation and answer any questions that any of you may have. And so we do have the Q&A feature. If you'd like to put any questions you have in there, then both James and I can kind of facilitate asking those questions to the research team member present that may be best suited to answer it.
And if anybody would like to raise their hand, you also have the feature to raise your hand. So if it's easier to ask the question in person, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you and let you ask it. So, yeah. Are there any questions? We might have answered them all.
I guess just to start it off, I know we have one of our research assistants present who's done quite a bit of work on the project in the last little while, especially making the slides for today's presentation. But Gobika, I was just wondering if you could talk to a bit of your experience on the project and maybe the biggest lesson you've learned so far that you've taken away from the work you've got to be a part of.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Roxy, for introducing me. My name is Gobika. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a research assistant with the project, and I'm also a second-year occupational therapy student. So for folks who are not familiar with occupational therapists, we are professionals, healthcare professionals, who support people to do whatever they need to do, want to do, and are expected to do. So whichever your goals are, we'll figure out a way to get you there. So that's what occupational therapists are. So what I do in this project is I started to work with Rebecca and in the research team, mainly on analyzing the interviews that we talked about in the, during the presentation, and also like actually conducting the interviews itself. And I found it, like it was said multiple times during the presentation, how valuable it is to have project consultants, actual Special Olympic athletes there. They bring a unique perspective that no one else in the team really have, because they have lived experiences and they have a really nice, fresh perspective, which is, I found something really valuable, not just with my research, but as in my career as a healthcare provider as well. So that's something that I find very valuable and I want to share.
Thanks for that. And we've got a question in the chat, which I think Rebecca, Kelly, and James could kind of tackle this. So whoever really wants to take it on, but how did you recruit your athletes for the project?
This is Rebecca. I can speak to that a little bit, and then Kelly or others might want to jump in and add to what I'm going to say. So we did recruit through Special Olympics Ontario, and James put us in touch with the appropriate people at Special Olympics who could try to help us do that, including one Special Olympics athlete who actually was working with Special Olympics Ontario at that time. Now, it was really important in this research for confidentiality that none of the people on this team knew the names of those people who ended up participating in the study. So we had to do this in a very arm's length way to protect everybody's identity. So I'll just say off the top, none of us on this team know for sure who our athletes are. As soon as they were entered into our study, everything they said and told us, we assigned a fake name to all of their information. So we never know, I never know who took part, James doesn't know who took part, etc., etc. And neither do any of the athletes on the team, on our research team. Including Kayla. We don't know who those people are. So that's why we went through a special process of recruitment where someone else recruited, not any of us on the team. James just made it happen by getting the appropriate people at Special Olympics involved. And then when people were emailed about the project and sent a flyer by email, they could contact either the person recruiting from Special Olympics, or they could contact our project coordinator, who then did what's called a screening, just making sure that they were eligible. We had some criteria like have been involved in Special Olympics for at least a year, for example, and had to be within the age of 18 to 35. So criteria like that. So that's how the recruiting happened. And it was slow at first, and then it really took off. And I must say that a lot of our recruitment took place just after the pandemic started, and we were all holding our breaths wondering, oh my goodness, will anybody participate? And especially when we had to switch to, or to do our pandemic pivot, as we call it, to doing a virtual online interviews instead of the in-person interviews, which I would have really liked to do, but this is the way we did it. So that's how it all took place. I hope that answered what you were asking, and maybe others want to jump in here too.
I actually think we've got another question from Duncan, who says, this is great research. I'm wondering if there's any thoughts of research of parents and caregivers and how the sense of belonging is for them. Part of the thoughts he has is around the connections amongst family and athletes to share their resources, the Healthy Athletes Program, and et cetera. And I'll speak to that briefly, but I would actually probably put this to Kelly and to Rebecca, just in terms of their thoughts around this, because we did talk about this extensively. I think this is the positive nature of this research is such that I think this is just the first of many steps and opportunities, right? Like I said, this is a very unique way of working, and but I guess I would go so far and be a little bit more aggressive and say it shouldn't be a unique way of working, right? Like this is something that has been needed for a long time, and and not to speak ill of the movement, but we have for a very long time made decisions on the basis of what we think we know, right? And all of a sudden that's changing. And so I do think that there's room for conversations about where parents and family members and caregivers fit into these feelings of belonging, and also how they feel about belonging to the movement. And Kelly, I might transfer that over to you.
Sure. And Rebecca, I know that as a team we talked about this, so I'm probably saying what you're thinking already, but I think as our team really valued the voice of the athletes themselves. I think we could say a lot with the research involving athletes or individuals with disabilities. It's often been, or with intellectual disabilities specifically, the caregiver, where it ends up, whether complete a survey or the interviews done with the caregiver, maybe perhaps with the individual with lived experience. But I think the caregiver from a research standpoint is often overrepresented and less so from the individual themselves. Having said that, the work that I've been involved in other projects, like for example, with Unified Sport, one of our focus was involving with caregivers. And one of my undergrad students had started some work in this area. COVID had hit and changed a lot of things for us. There's also a teacher strike, which makes things a little bit difficult, but we did hear, so in that case it's from Unified Sports, and we were really interested from parents of athletes, unified athletes with and without intellectual disabilities, and speaking with those parents of unified athletes with intellectual disabilities, so just saying the role that they play is they felt to be very different than a parent of a unified athlete without an intellectual disability. So, it was a very small study, but from the unified context, we're getting that parents do play a role, but it's different depending on if the athletes, is living with a disability or not. But I think for us as a team, we just really wanted to hear from the individual themselves, their experience of belonging, because it's so personal. It's an individualized experience.
Thanks for that. We also have a couple more questions that are popping up. So the first one that came up is the research going to further expand to include more athletes, coaches, or caregivers, or involve follow-up studies? So are there any specific follow-up studies that we have in the works? Or I don't know, Rebecca, do you want to touch on that?
Sure. We don't have any specific studies planned right now. Certainly the study that we're doing now is being done with some funding that is limited to doing the study that we're reporting on tonight. But the plan in forming a partnership in the first place was that this would be the start of a number of research projects, whether it involved all the original people that are here tonight or whether It also took on board other partners in the community, other partners in Special Olympics, and other partners through the University of Toronto or other universities. So yes, I think there will be future studies. We haven't planned them specifically yet, but I think as we come closer to the end of this project, we'll have many new directions suggested to us from our findings, and we will want to plan some projects around those issues that arise from our study. Because as with any research project, usually you generate more questions from a research project than you do answers, and that's kind of the way it works. So we'll build on this study to at some point plan other studies, maybe with other partners within Special Olympics, as I said, and within other universities and the community at large.
So we've got a couple questions that I'm kind of going to group together. So there was a question that was, did the athletes involved have different abilities? And then there was another question that asked, would you say that the athletes in your study were high functioning? And if yes, would you expect different results with lower functioning and less verbal athletes? So kind of talking a little bit about the participants and how we navigated that.
Do you want me to answer?
Whoever wants to take that on, I can contribute to a response
Okay.
If wanted, but if other people want to start with it, then I can build on it.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to say that people who participated, I think, had a range of abilities. And the other thing I want to say, regardless of abilities, one of the things that some people in this life talk more than others. So abilities does not necessarily link directly to whether people will speak in an interview and say and express very important information when they're interviewed. So I just want to say that off the top. And yes, we did have a range of abilities, but our focus was not on diagnostic labels in and of themselves, but rather on the experiences of Special Olympics. And if any of the athletes who took part wanted to have a supporter with them during the interview, that was absolutely encouraged. And some of the people that were interviewed for this study, some of the athletes, chose to bring usually a family member with them. Some came to the interviews by themselves. And I must say that everybody who participated, regardless of ability level, provided us with very valuable information.
Yeah, I was going to say approximately the same thing, and just that, yeah, every interview that we had contributed to the findings, whether it had less words or not. It still contributed to the overall themes that we found within those findings. And the support person was really there to kind of translate anything that we asked, that put it into words that the athletes then were able to answer and respond and to the best of their capacities. And that kind of translates into this next question of how did you frame your questions for the interviews, and how did you balance the athletes' feelings without leading them?
Fox, can I actually just go backwards a bit on that?
Of course, yeah.
And I think, you know, when thinking of the different methods we use, so in this case, you know, we used interviews. Our team had a lot of great discussions that we wanted, like we didn't want to exclude anybody. And I think by having this inclusive research team, having representation and voices from the athletes and James, you know, I feel like we got those other experiences. I don't know if James or maybe Caleb, you wanted to speak to maybe how you and Ben and Victoria were able to, I think, help in the maybe interpretations, but also add those other voices that may be missing with the 20 or so individuals we interviewed.
Yeah, so I did touch on this earlier, but me and Ben are on a very large basketball team, and we are on the more capable, like the higher division. But what we also do is actually everyone on the higher divisions of our team, we coach the recreational team, which are the athletes who are the people who would struggle more with being independent or talking for themselves. And I in particular was doing a lot of one-on-one with an athlete who really came out of their shell. They wouldn't make eye contact with anybody. They barely even followed instruction. And just that consistency of us having that one-on-one coaching relationship helped them. They started drilling, like started practicing shooting the ball by themselves. They started like actually saying hi to other people, which was a huge step for them. And even got to the point where some of the other athletes on the rec team were starting to look out for this guy. Like they would hold his hand if he was lost or something like that. So there's a lot of like that's what I meant earlier, is that I wasn't just thinking of what would I want. It was also what would this person I have this experience with want. And I do want to focus on another question about bringing in like parents and family members and caregivers who can sort of translate for people that struggle with communicating. I think it's that we did address that. Like I've been on other research or focus groups with Special Olympics with athletes of mixed ability. A lot the athlete should always be present. It should never be the case of just talking to a caregiver or parent by themselves regarding the athlete. I mean, I do think there's some research to do just about the caregiver experience, but even with athletes who struggle greatly with communicating, they still have something to say if you're accommodating and considerate enough, and if need be, their caregiver can be next to them to help bring their words to the light.
I just want to quickly add, as someone who has conducted the interview with a support person or without a support person, just like everyone else said, the questions are directed to the Special Olympic athletes themselves. And then we specifically emphasize that in the consent process, which means like when we initially tell them this is how the process is going to go, and do you give permission to go forward? So the caregivers are already aware that the focus is on the young adults themselves, and then they would just be there to basically support them and not to answer the questions for them, because as everyone else said, the focus is on the young adults at this point. Just want to say that as an interviewer perspective.
And I'll just like to build on what Gobika and Calum have said, and Kelly said, by saying that one of the really valuable roles that the athletes on our research team played was to help us actually write the interview questions, and we tried to make them quite accessible questions to a range of people with of varying abilities. And interviewers were also free to help rephrase the questions if that was needed to accommodate the person who took part. So the other thing that the athletes on our research team really did, though, that was really valuable for this whole helping this whole communication process be accessible for the participating athletes, was that they engaged in practice sessions, which I think Calum referred to when he was talking. So what happened was, before we did any interviews with athletes, we actually had practice sessions with our athletes on the team playing the role of people that we would be interviewing in the study and answering the questions. Now, we weren't recording their responses, but what we really wanted to do in those practice or mock interviews was for our athletes, such as Calum, Victoria, and Ben, to feed back to us, are these questions okay for a range of people? In your experience as a Special Olympics athlete, based on the other athletes you've met, how would these questions work? What would we need to fix if they weren't accessible questions? What were some probing questions or extra questions we might have to ask? What questions might some people find hard to answer, and how could we make them a little bit easier for some people to answer and to understand and to answer? And that was a huge, huge important role that the athletes on our team played. They also, of course, trained our interviewers, because the interviewers were doing the practice session with them. So our interviewers got a real heads up about some of the things that they needed to pay attention to when they were doing the interviews. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because that was so hugely important with making this project a success.
Thanks for that. And there's one more question I think that is unanswered in terms of the preliminary findings that we have. So during your research, did you find that athletes still had a hard time belonging? I've heard from some of our athletes that they feel very judged from other athletes. So I guess just to start that off, just based off what I found in some of the interviews and then in analyzing the data, I would say that there were a variety of experiences, and I would say that the timing of those experiences differed. So going back to that kind of roadmap that we had of before Special Olympics, during Special Olympics, and kind of goals for the future, most of the athletes talked about instances where there was less feelings of belonging before Special Olympics, and that they found more feelings of belonging once they were in Special Olympics. And now that's not going to say that that's kind of the overarching trend, but for some of the athletes that once they got into Special Olympics, the first sport they tried wasn't the sport for them. They didn't feel those feelings of belonging in that sport. And it took some time to move around within Special Olympics and kind of try different sports to really find that kind of home or that place that they felt those feelings of belonging for them. And so some athletes may not have found that home yet within Special Olympics, and they're still trying to navigate that path. But overall, the theme that we found was that there were less feelings of belonging prior to joining, and that once they joined, they kind of went through this process of trying to find their home within Special Olympics, and most voiced finding that home.
And just to, I'm going to double back and just grab a couple of comments that came through here and just try to group them together too, if that's okay, Roxy, which is, a comment that Anne made, actually both Annes, they're two different Annes, made with respect to, it'd be interesting to include the input of unified partners and their own sense of belonging and value based on the relationship and experience of sport through unified sport. And Scully saying what started doing this research with SO. Do any of the researchers other than the athletes have experience with SO? Well, funnily enough, those two questions are directly related. And I mean, Kelly can speak to that, which is that this research actually started as a result of research that was being done with unified partners, like during the International Youth Games that was held at the University of Toronto, where a significant amount of research was done and interviews were done with unified partners and Special Olympics athletes and belonging. And that, of course, leads for Anne, the other Anne, which is that, yes, the researchers on the team have had a wonderful relationship with Special Olympics. And I'm going to just take this moment as well to thank them so profusely for that, but also to thank folks like Gobika and Roxy, who were instrumental in putting this presentation together. But also, if you look back at Dragana and Kristen and Helen and Cassie and Kathy and Amelia and Daniela, and all of those groups of students that helped do the interviews and all the rest of it, a big part of this engagement for us at Special Olympics. When I started at Special O, we had 2 summer students. And people on this call are going to laugh because this summer coming up, we have 76. And to be clear, those students run the range of employment opportunity as it relates to people with disabilities and people with intellectual disabilities. And the goal is to create capacity within our community, within our world, of people who are interested in doing this sort of research. And we're accomplishing that. And you don't have to look beyond Roxy and Gobika and our relationships with researchers like Kelly and Rebecca to realize that the needle is being moved as a result of that kind of engagement. And that's why we need more people to invest their time, their energy, and we need governments and funding partners to invest money into research to make the lives of people with ID better, right? And this is the way that we do it, through these sorts of partnerships. So we can't thank them enough for it. And so Kelly, I'm going to let you backtrack a little bit here and talk about how Unified, started this, but it's a perfect example, right? We started with Kelly. She introduced us to Rebecca, and the next thing you know, here we are.
Well, I don't know. I think it actually all came together. I don't know. Anyways, it did. It absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe more at the same time than one
Yeah,
was the other.
that's true. Yeah.
I would say, but regardless, it has all come together, and I think, I mean, Rebecca's involved as well in that unified sport research, and I by us working together on this project as well as the other, I think we're able to combine both findings and be able to share that with Special Olympics, and from there be able to apply it to the movement and the resources that you create. Now the question was, I think, around the unified partners around this. Yeah. So in the talk, I was part of the first day. I think it was the first talk. I presented some of the research with the interviews that we had done, and Roxy was involved with that research as well. So Roxy, you can jump in if I'm missing anything. But the unified partners, so the athletes without an intellectual disability, I think in that work we found that it often boiled down to the coach and how the coach how they worked with their team, how and how they maybe selected those partners. So some coaches' philosophy was, to grab the leaders in their schools, and they really worked with the athletes with intellectual disabilities and were as a cohesive group. Other athletes, those partners, maybe were brought on to felt like maybe like a helper role. And I think that, the takeaway from that research is that athletes are athletes, and in unified sports, you're all athletes. You all play that meaningful role, and the important role that the coach plays, the language that's used, and everyone is equal. Everyone has a different role to play. It's not a helper role. It's how you make a quality experience for the whole team. And Roxy, you were involved in the analysis of that research. I don't know if you want to add anything further with what I've been saying.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. Yeah, just the importance of kind of navigating going forward, if looking at instances of belonging, kind of maybe looking at the partner athletes and the language that's being used, and kind of terminology within Special Olympics and how that relates to feelings of belonging potentially in that environment, and outside of Special Olympics as well, like how that could translate to the school environment, for example. But yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. And I think that's it in terms of questions that I see here. So I will pass it over to James.
Thanks so much. And I just, I'd like to reiterate what I just said, which was our thanks and how grateful we are for these relationships, for the relationships that have been forged out of curiosity, out of the wish and the will to explore questions that relate to people, to subjects, to a whole field of research that we hold dear, but that is often underserved by research. To apologize, for 1 second, to say that, Kelly's absolutely correct. The timing of this stuff, is happening so quickly, that the opportunities for this research, presented by Rebecca, were happening in parallel with the work that Kelly was doing, which introduced us to Roxy, which included Jonathan Weiss from York, and included our friends at CAMH and all of the rest of it. But make no mistake about it, Special Olympics, all of you, athletes, volunteers, researchers, partners, are very much at the forefront of the research in this subject area. And that is an exciting thing to be a part of. And somebody made a comment, and they made the comment on Facebook, and I'm gonna actually read it, right? Which is said, this presentation is the building block for the whole conference. It pulls it all together. Awesome. And thank you. And I want to add my thanks to that and reiterate that is 100% true. The aspects of Unified, the aspects of inclusion, the aspects of including our athletes and our people and our volunteers, alongside all of these partners in research that we've always worked with, is is an absolute highlight because it's the thing that is going to drive this movement forward over the next, I was going to say next 10 years, forget that, the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. It's the thing that is going to get us through this current, pandemic in terms of what do we do next. And we're deeply grateful for all of you and for everything that you've done. So congratulations, everybody. Really well done. And I should also note that this is just the beginning. These are preliminary findings. There's a lot more to come from this team. And I can't wait to see what happens next. So have a great evening. Thanks for joining us and have a great day. I'm just gonna... Goodbye, everybody.